And also just want to acknowledge that we're going into November is Native American Heritage Month. You know, land acknowledgement is a good first step to being in right relations with First Nations people. But, you know, this upcoming month is a way for us to continue to amplify those voices and be in solidarity with our First Nations people. And I know Amparo just said hi, but if you don't mind introducing yourself, Amparo, and like, I'll go after.
Hello, everyone. I am Amparo Chavez Gonzalez. I work with the UCLA History Geography Project. I'm a coach and a lead facilitator, and I've been an educator for 31 years. I've worked with 3rd through 12th graders.
And Amparo, if you don't mind dropping the check-in questions in the chat for the folks that are just coming in. And good afternoon, everyone. My name is Cindy Mata. I'm the Associate Director at the History Project. And I've been an educator throughout the secondary continuum. So 7th through 12th, everything in between. I always say AB, IB, credit recovery, the whole thing. Even a skills class at one point. Somebody thought I could teach. And yeah, really excited to be doing this work, seeing new faces. I know for some of you that are coming back from last year, we read the responses, so we know some folks are coming back from last year, and we're really happy to be working in collaboration with Jason and Daniel and then moving this work forward this year. So thank you all so much. And I'm loving seeing all the introductions in the chat. We have people from all over California. So this is really dope. Give you a moment to look at the objectives. These are our objectives for our time together. So the collective of these meetings. And just as you're reading those over, we wanted to drop in the definition for praxis as we understand it. I see you. So, our ideas for these next 6 weeks, we know we've read all the responses, so we know y'all are looking for resources, and we promise we are gonna come through on that. But we also wanna make sure that in our time together, we take a look at foundational texts in the field, that we engage in identity and intersectionality work. So we'll build this into each of the meetings. That we embed community knowledge and history into this work, really elevate that as we go along. And that we engage in ideas around classroom praxis. So how do we take the ethnic studies theories and foundational texts that we're talking about and incorporate that into our classroom practices, but also in community praxis, right? Because the end goal here is for our students to learn those theories and ideas and concepts and then do something with them for the betterment of their community. And so we want to make sure that we understand, like, that's the trajectory of how we see the work of ethnic studies working in tandem with the university, with the classroom space and the community. Oh, we still have people coming in, I love it. All right. And then here's our agenda for today. So I know as we're going, we're doing our intros. So thank you, everyone. We're definitely going to start off right off the bat with some identity work, and then continue on. Also, just as a quick, as we keep going, just want to make sure everybody knows that the recording will be posted on the website, the slides will be posted on the website, and then like a formal agenda will also be posted with all the hyperlinks. So don't worry about, like, if you didn't get the link or anything like that, like this will all be on the website for every meeting after the meetings are done. So, awesome. Okay. Thought I'm going to hand it off to you.
Yes, thank you. If you could go to the next slide, Cindy. So we want to begin our time together today with doing some identity work. Anytime that we think about ethnic studies in the field of ethnic studies, we know that as educators, we begin with some identity work. So we want to invite you to please find a piece of paper, or if you want to open a document on your computer, whatever you feel comfortable with, to please take a look at these 6 questions. We definitely are asking you to please answer question 1 and 2 in your journal, and then to pick 2 others from the prompts to try to write 2. Don't worry if you don't get really far. Some folks might get, really deep into number 1 and 2. That's okay. But if you could take some time, we're going to give you about 7 minutes to do that. And then we're going to do some sharing with other people in community. So if you want to turn your camera off while you're journaling, feel free to do so. We will turn on some music, and then we'll come on and let you know that it's almost time. And then when the music is off, you'll know that it's time to return. Thank you. Okay, everyone, come on back. Wonderful. So, Cindy, thank you. So we want to do now is we want to have you be in conversation with the partner. We know someone just came in. Give us a moment and we'll try to catch you up. We are sharing our core values and where those core values come from. So if you could quickly jot down some ideas as we put you in a group. We are going to invite you, each person, to share for 3 minutes, and we'll send a prompt for you to know when to switch. And if time permits, then we'll have the other person share. Okay. We know that identity work is hard. It's about caring. It's about reflection. It's about being open and brave. And so we encourage you to be open and brave. And we also encourage you to be that kind of listener that welcomes, that courage, who is caring and loving, and who is supportive of the person that you're listening to. We know that oftentimes teachers, we don't get that. So we want to make sure that you know that you are more than welcome here. We know that we're going to talk about things at times that are hard. And we know that in community, we can find some support and some care for one another. Okay. Yeah, hi, everyone. I was going to put in the chat that if there's anything that you notice that stood out to you from what you and your partner share, feel free to put it in the chat and we'll try to take a look real quick and mention a couple of folks. We know that we want to be cognizant of time as well. Okay. Definitely, shout outs and thank yous to your partner are also welcome. Wonderful. Some shared values there around integrity. Wonderful. Thank you.
Awesome. And as we just kind of wait to see if anybody else has any comments that they want to drop in the chat. Oh yeah, even the affirmations, that's awesome. We really wanted to start with this particular prompt because we felt it really does go in line with the way in which we see the work of ethnic studies at the UCLA History Project, right? So we wanted to spend just a little bit of time going over like our particular approach to ethnic studies, and identity is a big component of that. And so we wanted to just give y'all time just from jump to kind of like figure out like, why do you want to do this work? What are your core values that you're bringing to this work? and how might that translate into the classroom. We want to acknowledge that this is the type of identity work that needs to start before even teaching a course, and that identity work is something that as educators we need to be constantly doing, right? I know like most courses have an identity unit that we ask our students to engage in, but you know, we should be really doing that work prior to having our students engage in that work. We also want to acknowledge that with that identity work, content is an important component to ethnic studies work. And so ethnic studies is its own discipline, right? So even as we're coming in to these spaces as predominantly history teachers, even though I do know from the responses that there's a few English teachers with us as well. But we want to acknowledge that even though we have a strong sense of history knowledge and content knowledge in the history science or social science, that ethnic studies is its own discipline, and that there's all these other components that fall within that umbrella of ethnic studies, right? And so we want to make sure that we're developing in those areas as well. And then we definitely have decided that something we want to always put to the forefront is our communities, the communities in which we work. And so some of that involves content, like learning about the community, and some of that involves what we had said earlier about like praxis, right? And so this idea of like, we're doing this work for the betterment of our community. And that may mean like geographic community, that may mean like the community in which I engage with like ideologically. So community looks and takes on different forms. But that these three things are core as you're thinking about your ethnic studies course, that these three things should be constant in its development, in the development of your course. And so to that end, from this point moving forward, anytime we think some of this stuff is being highlighted, you'll see like a bubble in that particular color. So anything that's content related, you'll see a bubble that says content. So we're trying to call that out for you as we move on. And then just to ground us in a definition for ethnic studies, we want to call out the framework definition of ethnic studies. We know that obviously there's a bunch of definitions. We encourage you to have your own definition of ethnic studies and what does ethnic studies mean to you. That's part of that constant reflection piece. But we'll give you a moment if you haven't looked at this. It was part of the PDF that was emailed out. So it's within that PDF, but this is the definition for ethnic studies lives within the history framework in the chapter on 9th grade electives. So if you're wondering where this comes from, it's there. And we'll continually come back to pieces of that document. So if you didn't look at it or glance at it before today, don't worry about it. We'll be excerpting pieces like this particular slide throughout our time together. All right, Amparo, let's jump into some content.
Here we go. I keep on muting myself. Sorry. So we want to talk about the background that a lot of us have been wondering about, right? So there's a wonderful activity we're going to do right now. We're going to put a link in the chat for you to take a look at this timeline. And as you look at the timeline, we're going to ask you to think about this question, right? So why did the ethnic studies movement begin, and how are the current movements for ethnic studies connected to this origin story? So if you could take a couple of moments, we're going to ask you to spend some time with that timeline. And Cindy's put in the chat.
Give you some time. I'll put a timer on to explore. Go through the timeline. Some of the pieces in the timeline are videos, so you might want to mute yourself and play excerpts from that. Just give you time to explore that.
All right. We're wondering if anyone would like to share, so how does this timeline help you have a deeper understanding of not only the past, but the current movements that are happening right now for with ethnic studies? Anyone? We'll open it up maybe to one or two quick comments.
Go ahead and share.
Thank you.
Yeah, just reflecting on the need for teachers of color, especially with the passing of AB 101. Just that's like a direct connection, because there's going to be an increase, right? A demand for teachers of color and or people who are properly trained to teach ethnic studies at the high school level. So yeah, just the need for more teachers of color in education, K through 12 setting.
Thank you. Right. So we're anticipating that these new laws and things that are laws and bills that are passing are going to increase the need for teachers who are well-trained, have that mindset that is needed, and are ready to do this really hard work, right? That combines a lot of different things in our field of education. Thank you. Appreciate it.
And just building off of what Castro said, this idea that we want to have our voices heard, and that we do exist, and that we are here, and we're not just a separate history, we are history, right? And that we should be heard, and that we should be seen, and that we should be valued, because if we're not valued, then what's the point?
Yes, thank you. And I promise I didn't pay him. He really helps me with the next slide and the next piece that we're going to be doing as a group. So Cindy, if you could go to the next slide. Thank you, Ricky. So we know that the latest bill passed, right? Castro mentioned AB 101. We want to make sure that you know what it has in it. And we have a link. Let me put the link in there so that you guys can have it in the future. And we're also sharing it with you. Definitely that the first class that will have this graduation requirement, and it's only one semester, will be the kids graduating in 2020, 2029, 2030. That it includes students enrolled in charter schools. I don't know where I wrote ethnic studies, that's a typo. And it also authorizes schools to require a full year of ethnic studies. So that is definitely something that local educational agencies, districts can require more than the semester, but the graduation requirement is only one semester. Okay, so we want to make sure that you have that update. That's as much as, there's a lot in the bill, you can read it for yourself, but we think that that's what's really relevant in terms of updating that timeline. Cindy, if you could move to the next slide.
Perfect. And I'm also just seeing that comment that Ricardo wrote, right? So origin story is the reminder that our work today taps into a historical field of discipline. And that's so important. I think, right. Highlight. Mute yourself. Thank you so much. Apologies. I already have like a bulldog that's snoring in the background. So any other noise, I'm like, what's going on? So sorry about that. But we wanted to think of like, how might we take that knowledge, that history of ethnic studies and its roots, and what might that look like in the classroom? And so we wanted to show you, because we did promise resources, a fully developed unit of study that you all can peruse. It's quite a lengthy document, But with our partnership with LAUSD, a couple of our educators, Roxana Dueñas and Jorge Lopez from Roosevelt High School, had this idea in mind, right? Like, so we know the origin story of ethnic studies. How can we let our students know that they fall onto this long lineage of folks of color, youth of color that have been fighting for them to be in those seats that they're in today? And how might their stories now be incorporated? So this mini unit that can extend up to like 14 days really captures that, and also focuses in on content, identity, and community. So just as a quick overview, it is a unit of study, so it's not like one lesson. So there's a couple different inquiry questions that go with it. So why does ethnic studies matter? How have schools changed or remained the same throughout history? And how have communities of color responded to traditional schooling? Which I think that timeline really highlights, right? Oh, don't worry, Amparo, I'll drop it in right now. And for the lesson objectives, these are some within the unit. I'll give you all a moment to look at those. And so they're really looking at like, what was the purpose of education and how did ethnic studies come in to disrupt that purpose of education? And then like, there's this component of hope and agency, right? Because it ends with the students developing a manifesto. What do they want to see? Which is really great to start the year off with, because then it's like, okay, now you know what your students want to see. And as part of ethnic studies, that's like our goal, right? To get students motivated and to believe that a better world is possible. And start within the classroom and within your school community. So this is not necessarily the order in which it goes in, but there is a timeline component. So she, because Roxana did this particular part, but she created a timeline that was specific to Roosevelt. So in their timeline, she included when Roosevelt gets ethnic studies and puts that as a component to it. So like that's a story one that we shared with you. You can like take parts of that and you can like make it your own, right? And then there's also a component within their lesson where students do a like personal schooling journey, and they teach 9th grade high school. So it's an opportunity for them to reflect on their middle school and elementary experiences. But I pulled out this particular slide because the school in which Roxana teaches at is a magnet school. So that's why that particular question is there, right? So if you teach at a magnet school or a school of choice, then like what made the students pick that particular school, right? And maybe they hadn't thought about that. Maybe it's their parents that chose for them, but like having that discussion, right? And what did you hope to your experience would be like? So I love that idea that the students are also the holders of the knowledge, right? Like they have been in schooling at this point for over 9 years. Like they have plenty to say about schooling. And then it ends again with that manifesto, and where the students like take in everything that they've learned. And there's also a component where they learn about like the beginnings of ethnic studies. And so they reimagine what do they want to see in their classrooms, because they definitely use it to structure their year, but also in their school, larger school community. So here's the link to the lesson. We know we've been at this for a hot minute, so we're definitely going to give you all a break. But during this extended break time, if there's pieces that you are thinking about looking at in the lesson, I've just highlighted some pieces because the document is lengthy. So I've highlighted some pieces where you can go and look at these particular components that I highlighted in the slide. So I think Amparo, what do you think?
Breaking up. I think if we can take a 5-minute break, since we are running a little bit behind time, if you want to peruse through the lesson, please do so, but also make sure that you do, some self-care and stretch, get some water, anything else, and we will be back at 4:55.
Perfect.
Thank you, everyone.
And as folks are coming back, I just want to highlight the comment that Christina made in the chat about the vocab terms being highlighted. And there's a specific part within the unit where they spend time going through key ethnic studies concepts through the flashcards that I mentioned. And so that's part of the unit. So you're wondering, like, how do these students know these terms so early on in the school year? I think the flashcard activity and the way that they wrote it up definitely helped with that. Perfect. So we're going to transition now. We're going to transition now to look at a specific text that we consider a grounding text in the work that we do. So we're going to get a little bit into some content right now. We realize it's about to be 5 o'clock, but we promise that we've excerpted it. And so we think that we're just going to engage in a piece of this. But the text was written in 2006 by Alexia McGovern from Dominguez Hills. And she's part of their teacher education program. And Tracy Buenavista from Cal State Northridge, and she's part of the Asian American Studies department there. And this is the title, Ethnic Studies with K-12 students, families, and communities, the role of the teacher education in preparing educators to serve the people. And so their focus really was on pre-service teachers. And I'm quoting from the beginning of their text here, which you'll get a copy of. Many students, communities, and educators are asking themselves, how should ethnic studies look in our specific context? And so this essay addresses the teaching of ethnic studies within K-12 education by establishing 4 key tenets that they believe should ground the work. So if you've ever heard like folks talk about like the 4 tenets of ethnic studies, this is probably the text that they're referring to. And we'll, like I said, we'll give you the article that has everything in there. But we thought for today, we would look at one tenet in particular and kind of deconstruct what does that mean. So we're going to be looking at the first tenet, tenet 1. I'll give you a moment to read that text. So the tenet 1 is question white supremacist notions of ideological objectivity and neutrality in the process of knowledge construction, right? And that's like heavy. So thank you, Sasha, for starting us off. In the chat, we're definitely asking you to, what is this tenet bringing up for you, either intellectually or emotionally? How are you reflecting? Seeing the things coming up in the text, like this is a process. Do I have the skills and knowledge to do this, right? Unpacking and unlearning. It's the dismantling from within, right? That goes back to that identity component and that constant self-reflection. It involves bringing in different narratives, and I'm seeing other people touch on that. Soul work. Yeah, that pushback for sure is real, especially during this time. Thank you for being so open. Right, and just to go like go along with that, that notion of pushback, and especially in the times we're in right now, right? If you're looking at Tenet 1, the way the title is written, that has like the potential, but there's so many buzzwords in there, right? Of folks who might want to push back. And so it really is like, how do we understand this? How do we break this down? And what might this look like in the classroom?
Yeah.
And thank you for saying that, Castro. To that point of meeting people where they're at, I think, right, this is like that notion that we're in, that part of this ethnic studies work is a journey of self-reflection. And that we're going to be engaging in difficult topics and difficult conversations in this space throughout our time together. And that we want to just make sure that as we're doing that, and as people are challenging our notions of understand and how we understand that we're also being mindful and caring and graceful with others. We're all at different points in our journey of unlearning, relearning, or learning for the first time. All right, so we're gonna dive out more in depth. Battle's gonna walk us through
I think the question of how do we create spaces in our classrooms, right, to support students as they start to uncover a lot of this is going to be important. It's also going to be important as educators that we have spaces to be in community with others, right, where those folks who are already doing some of this work, who have begun it, like Sasha, feel supported and feel that we are in awe of how courageous and brave they are. And so it's important that we share that too, right? And we're going to do a lot of talking about not only what this looks like in the classroom, but what this means to intentionally as educators make sure that there's that hope and joy, right, as part of this work, that we don't leave kids feeling like they're so upset and angry, but there isn't a way to do something, right, to be a part of the, for lack of a better word, the solution, right? So that's important. Okay. So Cindy, if we could move on to the next slide, appreciate it. Go ahead and click. So part of that work that we need to do, and that Tenet 1 is asking us to think about, it is what are the stories that students traditionally learn through the history curriculum, right? And in particular, we're going to use the example today of what is traditionally narrative about westward expansion. Just that term, right, that we use. So go ahead, if some of you have some ideas. What is that traditional narrative that most of us learned or that students usually walk away with regarding westward expansion? Manifest destiny, yes. What else? Yes, manifest destiny, right? It was destined to happen. It's inevitable, yes. This rugged individualism, progress, yes, thank you. Thank you. White is right. It's another way of definitely saying it, right? Right? Saving us from us. Yeah. The westward. Okay. That might be another way of putting it, right? And so what does that mean? I love that. American exceptionalism. Yes, that was, yes, definitely. Right. And Cindy, if we can move on. Pioneers. Yes, they were probably in they were the brave ones, right? And so when we think about this image, if you could click one more time, right? Whose truth does this picture value when we use it to teach, right? And you want to ask yourself as an educator, the next question too, settling the frontier, opening the West. Whose knowledge are we valuing when we reinforce teaching about westward expansion using this picture, right? Right, somebody put in there, bringing civilization. We're bringing civilization to these people who didn't have any, right? We're bringing progress. What does that mean when we say that? And that's those images and the knowledge that we center in our classroom, right? And whose knowledge are we valuing and reinforcing when we do that? Okay. Go ahead, Cindy, next one. So we're going to ask you to go into a quick breakout room, right, Cindy? Yes. And we're going to ask you to think about these questions, right? Where did you learn this version of this narrative? What sources do you rely on when you teach this narrative of westward expansion? What power relations does this narrative reinforce? And then what narratives are missing from that version? Okay. We're not going to spend a lot of time in breakout rooms, but share with your partner some of your thinkings around this. And again, it's part of that identity work that we're doing for ourselves.
We'll give you a moment to kind of sit with these questions. I also put them in the chat. And then I'll open up the breakout rooms and we could do 3 minutes each and I'll broadcast again. But I'm sure this is going to be much more conversational. And I'm opening up the breakout room.
So what might be a different mindset? And we've been talking about this as one of the really important parts of being an ethnic studies educator is that you want to grow and you want to develop your mindset, right? How do you look at what you're teaching and you think about those self-reflection and you think about what other narratives are missing. So when we think about what is that other narrative that is missing when we think about the so-called story of westward expansion, it's very much so this idea, right? That there are other voices, there are other narratives that we need to think about including. And that to teach about people moving from the east to the west, even though lots of people were already in the west and along the way as well, there were already tons of people there, right? It's this idea of settler colonialism. And if you're not familiar with it, it's, Cindy's gonna put a definition in the chat for us, right? It's this idea that that land was the key, right? And we know that many of the people that came to the Americas did not, when coming from a feudal system, did not have land. And so land was the wealth that you sought, right? And so literally this idea of settler colonialism is that indigenous peoples, First Nations, are removed. And so when you look at this picture, of done by Charles Hillard, you see a different truth, right? So whose truth does this picture value? And what are the indigenous people in this picture doing? Yeah, thank you, Ricardo, it does, right? And so if you could click to the next question, Cindy. If you think about using this picture and juxtaposing that with the gas picture, how might this picture expand that truth and knowledge base for your students, right? This picture is equally rich in its message, equally rich in what it's proposing needs to happen to the land, to the animals. And it brings a different perspective about the relationship of people to the land, of animals to people, and animals to each other, right? It's a very different perspective. And so it's important for us to think about how this picture might expand that knowledge base and truth. Okay. We're running out of time. All right, sorry, we're gonna rush through the next part. Because we want to give you, okay, think about it.
Give a shout out to Ricardo, who put an Indigenous Peoples History of the US. I didn't know there was a Young People's version, but yes, Dunbar Ortiz is amazing. She just came out with a new book, I think in August, and it's like it's around the context of not a nation of immigrants. So this idea of that debunking that mythology as well, and the teacher's guide. So yes, this is also a really amazing space to share resources. So thank you all for doing that. And just as we're like wrapping up, taking a deep dive into that tenet one, right, which had a lot of terms that were specific to ethnic studies in its title. We also just wanted to, again, call out the framework, and that the framework has a very similar idea to tenet one, right? So when we say we're influenced by tenet one, that definitely shows up in the writing of the framework too, because the UCLA History Project was one of the primary writers of this section of the framework. And so this is the work. This is the work. It's like having those conversations that you all had where it's like, well, where did I learn what I learned? What resources am I using to teach this? Let's take an inventory check of what my resources might be telling my students, and what resources might I need to include to get a fuller perspective of what's going on, or to counter those ideas. And so we just always want to call this out, because to the point that was raised earlier, right, of like that pushback, I think anytime you can point back to a state document that says like, it's asking you to do this, it's asking my students to do this, like this is always coverage for ethnic studies educators. So definitely want to highlight that. And just as a reminder, right, that building that criticality comes with in spaces like this, of having those discussions. Okay. So, believe it or not, our time is almost up, and we have covered quite a bit. So we just wanted to give y'all a moment to kind of take a pause, in the spirit of reflection, kind of take in all the different things we quickly went over in an hour and a half. And as you're thinking about all these different pieces that we covered, we want you to sit with what might this look like in your classroom? Like if you were going to take one of these pieces, what is one of the pieces that you might incorporate in your classroom? What is one idea that you heard today that you might want to incorporate in your classroom, and what might that look like? So give you a moment to reflect on that. And when you're ready, if you could either drop it into the chat or one or two people want to unmute. That works too.
Having students examine their own core values. That's great. Thank you. It's a great way to think about it. And Joy also shared remembering that self-reflection piece for yourself as you're developing courses within the district. Thank you, Joy. Mm. Yeah, thank you, Sasha. You know, we think we're inventing the wheel, but you know, other folks kind of did that hard work, and we stand on the shoulders of giants. That's important to remember. Yeah. Make sure that you're checking out that narrative and then you're asking yourself, is there other narratives that I need to include in what I'm teaching? Great. Yeah, there's a lot of different conversations that are messy and that are important that we keep up to date. There are a lot of conversations that are within groups, across groups, and those are important conversations for us to think about, listen to, and take what we can to inform us, right? And those are important as well. Helping one another, right? Just tapping into that, tapping into what do I know, what does somebody else know, and putting it together. Well, we'll get some better stuff, is what I always tell people. Wonderful. Yep. Yeah. My son is in college now, and I tell him that he's developed that antenna for finding like-minded people, right? We got to have that antenna as teachers and find like-minded educators to support us. I think that's really, really important, right? I love it, Daniel. Yes, that courses needs to be local, individualized, so that kids feel connected to that coursework. It's no good if I'm bringing LA history, right? And my favorite, my girl crush from LA, Biddy Mason, to kids up north. They're gonna be like, yeah, okay, cool, right? That we've got to think about how do we localize and build the community knowledge as well. And that we bring in speakers from the community to support with that learning. Wonderful.
And I think just to call back as we transition, also that like your students also have a wealth of knowledge, right? And so that lesson of having the students share their own stories in the education system, right? It's like reminding, that constant reminder that the students also have a wealth of knowledge that they can share with one another and that we can learn from. So we have just a few minutes left, and we're hoping that, Amparo, if you don't mind, sorry, dropping the link. We want these meetings to be of service to you, right? So we definitely want your feedback. We kind of drafted this meeting based on all the responses that we got, but definitely as we continue on, we would love to get your feedback. So if y'all could check out that link, make sure that it works before you leave, fill out that eval, that's really helpful for us. Lets us know how we can better facilitate this space. And you know, y'all work with several different partners today. So if you want to give them some love in the chat, that would be awesome too, because we made it to 5:30 and it was a long, long day in a month that's felt like it's gone on forever. And we just really want to thank y'all for being here. And a reminder that our next meeting is November 18th, but once we update the website, we'll be sending a mass email out to let y'all know all the resources are on the website, and so we'll be in correspondence before November 18th, but just y'all want to put that in the calendar. So anybody having a problem with the link, just want to make sure we get that settled before 13. Looks like everybody can access it. Awesome.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Cindy.
Thank y'all so much. Yeah, have a good rest of your week. Order takeout today. Give yourselves a break. Bye. Have a good one. And we'll stay on for a minute longer if anyone has any questions, but if not, we'll see you all